Hello to all, and thanks for joining us today for a panel on women CEOs and on boards. My name is Emily Wilkins. I'm the DC correspondent for CNBC. We have a fantastic lineup of women today on this panel, all who have insights about how to keep companies resilient to changes in both business and society, and how to continue moving forward in diversity, and how to face some of the major challenges of companies today. Wanted to take a minute to introduce all of our panelists and let them chat just for a minute about kind of why they're here, what they're hoping to get from the conversation. And we'll start with Jill Evanko. She's the Chief Executive Officer and President for Chart Industries. Jill?
Thanks, Emily, and I'm thrilled to be here and with my fellow panelists. I think we all share a vision as well as action-oriented approach toward women in the workforce, in particular at Chart Industries, where I'm the president and CEO. We manufacture, engineer, and design equipment for a variety of different molecules. And so we operate around the world. And through that, one of the things that we look to do is have diversity inclusion of perspectives and be able to bring that to the table in conversations. And in our opinion, it certainly makes the company better, which is the foundation for all of the discussions that we have related to women as well as DE&I in the workforce.
Thank you so much, Jill. Also joining us today, we have Tonie Leatherberry, who is the board director for the American Family Insurance. Tonie?
Thank you, Emily. I'm so honored to be here with you and my esteemed fellow panelists. When I think about diversity and inclusion, and the many years that I have been in corporate America, starting off as a female engineer in technology, we're proud but never satisfied with the opportunities and with the progress we have made. So I, like Jill, agree that the more you have a diverse group of practitioners that are solving problems and bringing those perspectives to bear, the greater the impact can be.
Absolutely. And last, but of course, certainly not least, we have Singleton McAllister, who's a partner with Husch Blackwell. Singleton?
Thank you, Emily, and I'm so delighted to be here with my colleagues on this call. I've worked in the federal government, been with law firms, and I've had the honor to serve as on many corporate boards. And when you bring women to the table at all levels, you get a diversity of perspective in every way. And I love the work that the Women's Business Cooperative has been doing in growing the representation of women. Without women at the boardroom table or even in law firms making those decisions, you get a very different cookie cutter approach to a lot of things, the way we look at things. Women bring such a dynamic, diverse perspective to get us from a strategic objective position, dealing with recruitment, employment, employee relations, and overall just good business judgment.
Well, thank you so much, Singleton. And thank you, of course, to all of our fantastic panelists. Certainly one thing that a lot of CEOs, board members have to be dealing with right now are just a number of major changes that have really come up in the last few years. We had the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. We had supply chain issues. We had work from home. We had George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. We had the ending of Roe versus Wade. We had the ending of affirmative action in colleges. I want to get into some of these topics a little bit more, but right now I just want to start with the big picture. How has your approach to resilience changed in the last few years with some of these major events?
Well, it's interesting because when you think about COVID and the Floyd situation, they kind of paralleled at the same time from corporations, even law firms in that regard, about how to do business differently. I mean, everybody was on the Zoom or video conference call. People weren't obviously getting together, in on a one-on-one situation that we have done traditionally. But after the George Floyd situation, you saw a lot of the corporations, by 163%, brought in chief diversity officers into their company, recognizing there was a need to look at diversity in a very constructive, methodical way as to how they did business. As we go through this discussion and we talk about the lawsuits, unfortunately, we've seen a decrease for reasons that I don't think are wise. But nonetheless, during that 3-year period, we have seen an uptake in that arena. We've seen corporations come back. Some of them did earlier have DE&I programs. We see ESG, the New York Stock Exchange companies recognize the importance of that. So there was a lot of good thinking and work done around diversity, both with women and ethnicity. And folks who I think were going on the right path. So in that regard, we have to make sure that we keep that momentum going in a very big way, because companies are finding out that with diversity of perspective with women and ethnicity, you get a much better result in moving forward with your strategic planning and resiliency for your particular company and value added.
No, it's definitely a huge consideration, both in the DEI space and the changes that we've seen. Tonie, I also wanted to come to you with the same question. How have you your definition of resiliency and how you ensure that your company is resilient? How has that changed with the last 3 to 4 years?
Oh, thank you, Emily. And I want to underscore that the events that we witnessed over the past 3 years are a perfect storm. They are the kind of challenges that when you're in the boardroom, you're thinking about, what am I missing? What do I need to anticipate? How do I look into the future over the next 3 to 5 years? We think about risk, but there's also upside in these situations too. And I think one of the North Stars for us is, who are our stakeholders? So what do we represent in terms of our engagement with our communities, the communities that we serve, the shareholders that we serve, the employees that we serve? Who are we? And culturally, there's an intersection. So we can talk about the letter of the law, and we can talk about the spirit of who we are and the spirit of the law. And when I take a step back and I think about women in particular, I did some quick checking just to see where we are in terms of our progress. And I would say we are proud, but we've got much work to do. We're never satisfied. So Fortune 500 as a stat, we only have 47 women CEOs. That's not even 10% yet. But our spend, let's think about our spend. Of unmarried women, 80% of them own homes. Only 20% of unmarried men own homes. So if you just think about that one simple stat and you're in a boardroom, you're asking yourself, am I representing the needs of my consumer base, of my community? And women bring that perspective to the table.
I think that's an excellent point on making sure that you do have a board and a talent pipeline that really reflects the diversity that your consumers need for your company to really function well. Jill, I also want to come to you with the same question, just sort of how your definition and thoughts on resiliency have changed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think the world is a completely different place now, and that people, in my opinion, are thriving on a crisis. So every day brings a new crisis and a new item to deal with. But I would echo Tonie's comment about the upsides that exist here if we embrace the opportunity to respond and be proactive in terms of dealing with this type of thing. For example, I would say our team has become much more agile in responding and making decisions with maybe 80% of the information versus analyzing something to 100% point. So I think the upside opportunity, if you embrace it and you involve the different key elements that Singleton and Tonie already pointed out, which I won't repeat, is really, really important. I think the other part that we have deployed and will continue to do so is different tools in response to understanding better what drives people. And I think historically the answer was kind of always, okay, it's compensation as an example, and now it's people want to give back to the community, as Tonie commented. People want to have time to participate in activities in the workforce and during their working days that are not necessarily directly related to, I'm going to sit behind a computer or I'm going to fabricate a piece of equipment. And so how you deploy those tools and how you do so within your workforce is something that we're spending more and more time on. The last thing I would say is that we are becoming, while Singleton commented, we're behind Zooms. We spent a lot of time behind Zooms, right? But in turn from that, that allowed us to actually become more globalized with our workforce because we had more opportunity to interact with the non-US based workforce. And I think that what I've learned from that is you're never going to make every single person in your workforce happy, but you need to consider the all of the responses that you would get from deploying or not deploying a toolkit. So lots of opportunities, I think, as a result of the world being a different place. And I don't believe that there's going to be any end to the daily news crisis that exists out there.
No, definitely. I think think we're going to be seeing a lot more changes in the next coming years. Hopefully, not a pandemic again. But I did want to talk about, because we have seen a couple major changes, particularly on the Supreme Court. I want to get into a few of those. And Jill, you were kind of mentioning about that employees want things that are more than compensation. I think a lot of companies have had to think about certain things in terms of values, in terms of compensation in the aftermath of Roe versus Wade being overturned. Kind of how do you address that with your employees? How do you move forward with that? I want to make sure that this is a conversation. So, of course, anyone, you feel free to jump in at any point if you've got something to say or a point to make. But Tonie, maybe we can start with you for this one in particular. For the ending of Roe v. Wade, how did that lead you to think about your employees, just sort of what needs to be done to make sure that you're sort of maintaining a good workforce and really meeting some concerns that might have arisen after that case came down?
And that was a very tough case. And I'm sure my fellow colleagues here would say there were many boardroom discussions around this one in particular. And at the end of the day, for the boards that I serve on and the conversations that I've had with senior executives, it really boils down to we need to think about the health and well-being of all of our employees. So, of course, you're never going to do anything illegally, but what can you do to support the health and well-being of your employees? And so, where do policies need to change to adhere to law, but where can you have policies that still support reproductive health, still support women as they are having children and not violate anything? And so that's where it really kind of came down in terms of decisions that were made around our policies and around insurance programs and plans and the like.
What we think about as an organization is, does this directly impact our world, our company, and if it does not have a direct impact on what we do or our people, then we tend to not take a stance on a position or a topic. But what I would say is, I think Tonie's perspective on the concept of how do we ensure that our team members around the world are getting access to competitive benefits, and all of this kind of plays together in that. But from ensuring that we don't take a political stance on a topic unless it directly impacts our business is very important, because again, back to my comment about not making every employee happy, you're never going to make every customer happy either. And so it has to have a direct link to what we do and our shareholders, stakeholders, and what they're invested in the company for.
No, you guys are spot on. There have been many decisions made by the Supreme Court that you're not being political one way or another. You may like or not like, but as Tonie mentioned earlier, a corporation has to obviously abide by the law. And to Jill's earlier point, we want to make sure we take care of our employees and the people that work for us, right? And they're without obviously being political, 2024 is going to be a really important year. The Supreme Court has been I guess you could say, an activist court. There are other decisions that they made you may not support, but there are ways in which that the Women's Business Collaborative and others just need to be abreast of what's happening. I don't think that anyone close in my inner circle thought that Roe v. Wade would have been overturned. And it hit everyone, by surprise. But now that we see what's currently happening, obviously everybody's going to be in compliant because we're respected, companies, and are going to do the right thing. But we would like for everyone to be aware of what's happening in our system and not be caught off guard as we move forward to future policy-making decisions, both in your state and in your Congress and in the White House.
I know that obviously Roe v. Wade was sort of huge news and had huge implications. Of course, what happened with George Floyd, incredibly tragic, and then the Black Lives Matter movement. You saw a lot of companies kind of stepped up during that time, say they were going to put in DEI, saying they were going to hire more folks, saying they were going to look at their policies, offering programs to employees. I remember I got offered some by my company at the time, as far as really making sure that we were trying to be equitable and inclusive within the workplace. 3 years on, though, we have begun to see some pushback to DEI efforts from potential presidential candidates and some lawmakers. You had a number of attorney generals sign on to a letter to a number of companies suggesting that DEI is now against the law, with the Supreme Court striking down of affirmative action. And I want to just kind of do a vibe check. I mean, it's been 3 years now. Where are efforts at to make sure that workplaces are inclusive, that workers all have opportunity, regardless of their skin color, their background, how they identify? Is that kind of momentum that was initially there in 2020 still carrying forward, or has that become more difficult to maintain over time?
We're at a very interesting time in the history of the United States of America. Let's just be honest. You mentioned the letter that was sent with regard to DE&I by a group of attorney generals, but you didn't mention that those were all Republican attorney generals that signed that particular letter a few weeks ago.
You're correct.
That sent
yes.
it to the several members of Congress and others, basically expressing the position that you talked about DE&I, and there will be a retrenchment. But a few days after that letter, a group of Democrat attorney generals sent just the opposite letter that said that what happened with the university case is limited in scope, and don't overreach, and don't start changing your programs in that regard. So where we are right now, to be quite honest with you, there are webinars going on, there are conferences going on, there are seminars going on for corporations and even law firms. I don't know if you saw that just a few weeks ago. Perkins Coie was a lawsuit brought against them about their diversity efforts in bringing minority lawyers in and associates with their diversity efforts. So you see this growing wave going along that direction. My law firm, as a matter of fact, just 2 weeks ago, we did a webinar on some of this and said, listen, that's why I made the earlier comment, the Women's Business Collaborative needs to be abreast of what's going on, because it's WIN pushing in that direction, because there have now been about 3 organizations that are lobbying in that direction. But there are other organizations in the last few weeks that are pushing the other way. So we just can't get ahead and just follow that wave. We need to step back and see what the law says and talk about being, responding to what the law says, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, our position, because we represent several universities, is, we understand what they did with Title VII. We understand what they talked about preference with those 2 universities, but that doesn't mean there are other ways in which, from a holistic approach, you can develop other positions and policies to do the same thing. So those of us who are concerned about DE&I, those of us who are concerned about women's issues, listen, take a pause, get smart about how to move forward in that same direction, and let's not lose the momentum we've had for the last 3 years moving in that direction. I mentioned earlier about the whole situation with the DE&I employees that were brought into corporations, like, over 100%, there was an increase. We are seeing at the Executive Leadership Council, which Tonie would know very well, she's one of our past presidents, we have an effort dealing with corporate board diversity and bringing more minorities on boards. we're seeing a decrease of corporations asking for that momentum. But what we need to do in a holistic way, those organizations who are serious about the purpose of women and DE&I, we need to start doing some pushback. So I'm hoping that the audience of the Women's Business Collaborative, don't do anything illegal, but just go to your general counsels, go to your boards of directors, go to your CEOs and leadership and management team and say, listen, there are ways to do what we need to do smarter.
And if I can just quickly interject in here, because I am curious, and either Singleton or Tonie, if you want to answer this one, why is it that some companies are now moving away from their initial commitment to DEI efforts? And what would you say to someone from a company who is considering going that route?
Here's my humble observation. Some companies, culturally, they weren't committed before the perfect storm occurred. And so now this is a convenient way to retract. And as I would say to anyone who's looking at board service at some point in time, you have to come back to your core values and you have to decide whether or not you want to be that voice in the room to champion diversity and push and ask the hard questions in the boardroom. A lot of companies started writing, I'd call guilt checks. Everybody wanted one. Everyone wanted, the diverse female on their board or the diverse male on their board. And now you're, to Singleton's point, you're seeing a softening around that. But we should continue to push through our networks and opportunities. And when we see an opportunity, push to get that woman on that board. And so I think as a part of Singleton's point around making sure that we're informed and aware, we can't let up the gas on being advocates either.
And I'll just piggyback that comment because I think it's really important, this concept of networking and the idea that we're helping. And that's something that you set aside all of what's happening in the public sector and just look at our own companies and where we can have an impact. And I always smile because people invite me to things and I think half the time, well, I'm getting invited because I'm a female CEO. And then I say, well, so what? Let me go and let me have the opportunity to share views and network. And, we, I would say at Chart, the momentum is getting even stronger. And that's the result of exactly what we're discussing here, which are the Executive Leadership Council, the Women's Business Collaborative, the fact that Tonie and Singleton and I are here today having this conversation and pulling together the people that want to continue to drive this for performance forward. And I would say by example, we at Chart, we have 4 amazing females on our board of directors, and that wasn't because we said we want 4 females on our board of directors. It was because we had the right networks and we had wanted the right skill sets and we wanted diverse skill sets. And it so happened that we landed with 4 amazing females on our board. And we have 6 amazing men on our board. But we, that's 10 people that do a really nice job of working toward the same outcome.
The other thing, if you look around the planet, for instance, if you look at London, I mean, they have just done the opposite. I mean, they've passed legislation and policy to make sure that they have women on their board as well as in their management. They said, we're looking at you to see what women do you have in CEO positions, what women do you have in CFO positions, and other high-level positions. So we're going with. We can't go backwards. We need to go forward because we have been a leader of recent years in that area. So we can't lose that momentum for all the reasons my colleagues just said as well.
Absolutely. And I think, Jill, you even specifically mentioned about the networks. And I wanted to ask about this. Now that affirmative action in colleges have been overturned by the courts, obviously, as it was pointed out, that doesn't necessarily mean that companies have to make any change, kind of still working through the legalities of that. But at the same point, I know a lot of companies, they go to colleges to recruit. And now you had this base that had this tool to help promote diversity that it no longer has. And so I wanted to ask you guys about sort of how your companies, Jill, I know you touched on a little, if you want to elaborate, but how do you make sure that you are going out and making sure that you're recruiting strong candidates, considering talent, but also making sure that you're considering diversity and making sure that you have a diverse group of voices and perspectives at the table?
Yeah, so at our company, we consciously go out to a variety of different schools, and that again goes to this concept of networking. And in a lot of cases, we go out to these schools that we go to 20 to 25 different schools and network. And some of that is the result of the people that we have coming in, the workforce that want to go back to their schools and recruit. And some of it is a function of just we really do want diversity of skill set. And what we find is we don't go to these when we don't go to the school with an intent in mind. Like we go and we say, all right, we're recruiting for any position, not just engineers or not just finance people. If we go and we say, hey, we want to tell you about our company and we want to meet really, really great people and candidates, and then what we started to do is find roles. It will make roles, and that is something that Singleton touched on earlier about consciously having diversity officers, or we're consciously bringing people in even if there isn't necessarily a this person fits this open role. And I think that's really important, that if you find talent, that you bring that talent into the organization and you create the space for the ability to then continue that network down the line. Those are your best recruiters, people that come in from a variety of different schools. And if you stay, we used to be very homogenous in terms of going to 2 or 3 schools because they were deemed to be the best engineering schools. And now that we go out to 20 plus schools with a variety of different skill sets, we've seen way better talent as a result of that. So a different approach to diversity, but definitely resulting in a higher caliber of talent. And you know what? It's interesting. They're competitive between their schools, but they're better off because they're not just with the people that they went to school with.
If I could build on that, I've seen 2 or 3 other practices in addition to what Jill mentioned that are great. One is investing early and often. So it's not just showing up at recruiting, but it's actually building the pipeline. And so the work that Singleton and I've done with the ELC and with other organizations as such has done a lot around case competitions and seeing what the talent looks like out there, trying to get them networked with the corporations that we've worked with so that those students have opportunities. I mean, I saw even one case where one of the winners of the case competition was offered a job on the spot at a black tie gala by a CEO because he saw him and took interest. So this notion of networking again, it's a real opportunity to bring that talent to your galas, to your other convenings, to give them that exposure early and invest on, and be selective with those schools that you think represent the best diverse talent overall. And not just be homogenous, to Jill's point. So I think those are some of the practices that don't violate any laws.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in briefly, as we all know in the diversity space, it's the recruitment, promotion, and retention. Those are to go to the schools and to bring them in is one thing, but making sure that they're getting the work, they're getting the mentoring, they're getting the advice so they can be successful in that corporation. And in our law firm, one of the things that we've done at Husch Blackwell, which I don't think many law firms have done this, we have created something called a diversity liaison program. I mean, we have all of the affinity groups and all the, cross the T's, dot the I's that most corporations and other law firms do. But what we've done is, it was just before COVID, one of my partners and I, we started this program where the firm has invested in our young associates coming in, and we are not their mentors, and we're not the partners that are working with them on, or senior associates on other projects, but we're your diversity liaison, and our relationship is confidential. Are you getting the right kind of work? Are you getting your hours? How are things working out for you? Is partner X treating you right? This, that, and the other. And what was amazing to me, I remember when we first started this program around COVID, I was talking to one of our young associates. I said, "How are you doing?" "Well, I'm doing great." And then his review comes out and he's doing he had no idea he's not doing great at all. So I talked to partner X, and partner X said, yeah. And so, are you giving this associate feedback? No, but partner Y is. And I talked to partner Y, are you giving them feedback? Partner X is. So what has happened is we have seen a retention of our young associates, women and men. They haven't been leaving because we've been able to open up that pipeline to make sure they're getting the kind of work that they want. We're making sure what their concerns are. We're another resource for them that is confidential if they're having problems, so we can intervene. And the firm has really expended a lot. There were 2 of us that started the program, and now there are 6 of us. And it's taken a lot of our time, but it's one in which the firm has given us the opportunity to do that. And we don't get dinged for it, but it's a good thing. So all of that is important. It's not just bringing people in and going to the schools. And I know Jill's done a great job at Chart on this as well. And she and her team have nurtured those folks, because you want to keep that great diverse talent. Because one of the things, having served on corporate boards and having chaired, the Personnel and Compensation Committee, it's not just about the salary issue now. It's about talent management. I mean, there's a race for getting good people on your team, and one has to make sure that if you bring them in, that's a big investment, but you want to make sure that you're doing the right kind of work to keep them there and grow them internally.
I think that's something that should be underscored. In the boards that I serve on, the comp committee has expanded its scope. It's not just about compensation now. It really is looking at a DEI scorecard and looking at how individuals are performing, who are the up and coming high potentials, making sure the full board has exposure to them, having a DEI scorecard and reviewing that scorecard as a part of the committee. So it's really expanded to like people overall and not just comp.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, as far as not how do you just get people on board, but retain people. Certainly we saw a lot of folks switching jobs during the pandemic. And I know another thing that a lot of people look for when they look at if they can stay at a company is, can I move up? And I know that we already mentioned the 10% statistic for CEOs on Fortune 500 companies. The same survey noted that only 30% of board members for Fortune 500 companies were women. And I'm wondering, it's kind of 2-part here. Number one, what obstacles remain for women to actually get up to the C-suite and get up to leadership? And then pinging off of that, well, how are you guys developing pipelines to make sure that your successors and your colleagues at the top tier of leadership kind of fit that diverse set of folks that basically match your clientele?
I think a lot of it also is the individual. So we've talked quite a bit about establishments, organizations, and the processes in order to facilitate opportunities. And I think that's super important. And the more that we can do that via talent programs, coaching, mentoring, the things that you've already heard. One of the things, though, that I think is up to the individual is to actually want and desire and pursue those opportunities. And in order for us to help those people, it's, if you raise your hand and you say, I'm willing to do the things that I need to do and the experiences that I have to get in order to have the skill sets, then we as a company and as people need to make sure that we're fostering that. But I think it's a two-way street. It's as much the individual's responsibility, and a lot of that comes down to you have to, and this I think is a little bit different, especially for the earlier in career generation, that sometimes you have to take a parallel move. Sometimes you have to get an experience that isn't necessarily I'm going from college, undergraduate to a VP of something. And so I put some of the responsibility on the individual versus on the company. The other thing I would say is listen, there are rules that are restrictive to having more females on boards, especially in my chair, like sitting CEO. I'm on our board and one other as an independent, even though that's where I gain my most experience at. That's where I get my most, the number of ideas that I can bring back to my company and to my board come from sitting on another board. And having a rule that says ISS or Glass Lewis is going to vote against if you're on more than one other board is somewhat restrictive to our ability to continue to get that diversity and that experience set out there for those of us who have gotten to sit in this chair. So I think there's lots of things that we can do, but if we have the opportunity to also be proponents for again, giving the opportunity to people who have that chance to do so, then we won't be dilutive in order to try to hit a metric. We'll get that skill set in combination with the diversity. So lots of different ways to think about that question. But I would say the takeaway for our listeners in terms of where we can action is make sure that you as an individual are taking as much responsibility and putting yourself into that if you really want to get there versus having an expectation that it's going to be handed to you.
The only other point I would make is that having served on corporate boards, one of the things that we do when we want to look at talent management as a board member, we will ask management to let us see who are the hypos, right? So the board has an opportunity to look at those individuals. And I know that I particularly have asked to make sure we have some women in that mix, because oftentimes I've been on boards historically where I've never seen it, some, not chart forever, definitely not chart, but others where, they just bring in all white men. So I said, do we have any women here? Do we have any ethnicity here? And as a board member, it's your duty and your responsibility to ask those questions. And I have seen some of the companies I've worked with, they have brought people in and they're phenomenal. Women, diverse individuals who've done a great job. But if you don't ask as a board member, I think that's your responsibility to see what kind of talent do we have in this company. And the question would be, if we don't think they're ready right now, what do you need to do to get them ready for that position? Give them a good mentor, or do you need to move them around the company? They need to learn other things. I mean, the educational programs that are out there. I mean, there are all kinds of things that you could do to get that person up to the position that you want if you think this person is a high performer and is a keeper within your company. But it doesn't happen by osmosis. It has to be strategic, it has to be methodical, and it has to be purposeful. So as a board member, that's one of the things I look at when I go to the boardroom and talk to senior management and CEOs.
I definitely think, diversity is a huge point right now. I know another thing, though, a lot of companies and a lot of employees and employers are thinking about is the post-pandemic return to work. There's been, lots of emotions out there about working from home, about coming back in, about what kind of impacts that has. And I wanted to focus a little bit on culture in particular, because I know that that's one thing that a lot of employers will say, well, we have a company culture, we want people back and we want people in office. And I just wanted to kind of get your take on that. I mean, A, how do you establish company culture? And B, how important is it to be in person? Can you establish culture being remote? And at Singleton, I will start with you for that one, if you don't mind.
Well, culture, it's interesting. You go to some companies and they say, well, we have this culture. Okay, well, what does this culture mean? To understand historically, we can't let so-and-so have that position because that gets our culture, or we can't do this because that, that's not how we've always done things. Having said that, from a cultural standpoint, I'll give you an example. I served on the board of United Rentals for many, many years. That was a company that did 200 acquisitions in 1 year. They became the largest, well, they are currently the largest company in the world that does leasing of any kind of construction equipment. And as a result, as we got all these mom and pop shops, right, and rolled them up, I mean, obviously there were different cultures in all 200 of those companies we brought in. And as the company grew up, I mean, we had to be very disciplined to bring some phenomenal HR professionals in to get everyone thinking the same way and rowing, in the same direction. But that had to be purposeful, right? And right now, I think United has gotten more awards because, and the board was very much involved with that. That's when I was, at that time, chair of comp and personnel and management got it as well. So it was uniform. We were doing things the same way. It might have tweaked a little differently because we had to have some offices in Canada. But from a cultural perspective, we wanted everybody to be on the same wavelength as to who we are as a people. How do we move forward? How do we move the strategic plan? How do we deal with safety? I mean, all those things that a company, would have to look at in that line of business. And it was, you'd appreciate this. I remember the first year they put together a women's conference. I think you could have gotten all the district managers in one phone booth and myself. And and that was in Baltimore City. I will never forget it because I mean, when you think about a company like Chart or you think about a company United Rentals, they have not typically been women-oriented businesses, right? And the last meeting I went to 2 years ago, because we put together this women's affinity group, and we were very disciplined and bringing more women in the district manager and senior position. I think we had over 500 women. I mean, I spoke at that conference, and I was just so pleased and proud because these were women making a difference in a company with their hard hats, and gaining momentum. And there were women that were reaching back to bring other women in that area. So that became a part of that company's culture in a very big way. I mean, Jill could probably talk about this for the rest of this call because I know the great work that she's doing in Chart in that space as well. But when you talk about culture, it's one of those words where you have to be very disciplined on what that means, and you have to be strategic about it because it's not going to happen overnight. It has to be very disciplined, holistic, and purposeful. I used that word before. But the issues that we're talking about right now, Emily, that's why one has to be disciplined and moving in that strategic direction.
Yeah, I think culture is super important, and every company does have a culture. I'll step back to you asked the return to work question, and the way we approach culture is that you're an adult. If you get your job done, then that's great. Some people's jobs require you to go to a factory, other people's don't. I'm a mother of a just turned 10-year-old, and when I'm not traveling for work, I like to take her to school and I like to pick her up from school. That doesn't mean that I don't check my email at 9 o'clock at night, but that I'm not necessarily at the office to do that. And so, treating people with the respect of being an adult, and then if they don't live up to the expectation for the role, that's when you need to have that purposeful, the discipline side of things around it. So that's been the approach that we've taken. And the interesting part is the majority of people actually want to be together and they want to come together. And so we didn't need to mandate it because I think that treating people with that respect that you want to be treated with yourself is a super important part of culture. The other thing I would say that is an important part of our culture is to celebrate and to give back. And what I mean by that is somebody once said to me, corporations can't have hearts, don't have hearts. But leadership can, and the people in our company can. And how we do that, I think, really exemplifies what we as a company can bring not only to our team members, but our customers. Some good examples of that. We've done a daily shout out, a spotlight every day since May 2nd, 2020, since COVID began. 7 days a week, I send personal email out to the company and recognize somebody on our staff or in the teams that are giving back or supporting the customer. I have never, so 3+ years and 3.5 years in, I've not had a day where I don't have somebody that has nominated someone else for a shout out, for a spotlight. And that says a lot because it says they care about each other. And that's where I think leadership and team can have a heart, and that really can make culture. So that's an important part, is how you think about what culture really means to you as a leader.
Emily, the only thing I would add is there is no one size fits all. This is a test and learn process as well. Culture even evolves too. So does the culture work in sort of this new world order? What about our culture gets in the way of us accomplishing these things? Does an individual really have to be in the office? And that might have been our culture in the past. And so now you have to think about this marriage of the two, of the New World Order and culture, and the evolution to something that's net new. And we haven't all figured that out, right? So it's still a test and learn process is the only thing I would add.
Well, I think maybe that's a great note to end it on, that everyone wanting to come together, but also everyone's still trying to figure out different things. Singleton, Tonie, Jill, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your insights. This was a really fascinating panel. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for listening and for being a part of it. Please enjoy the rest of the conference.